We're here today with Paul Voss in Montague. My name is Tanya Kabala. Oscar Osbo is the videographer. And I do want to ask you, Paul, if you had a chance to read the legal release and sign that.
Yes, I did.
Thank you very much. And this interview is for the White Lake Environmental History Project. And the first question I have for you is just if you can provide a little background on who you are, do you have a family history in the White Lake area, or how did you get here?
Well, I was raised in Muskegon, born and raised in Muskegon, and married at a young age, and then my wife and I decided that we both wanted to go to college, so after having 2 children, we decided to do that, and we worked together and wound up at Michigan, and I did anyway, in dental school while my wife worked down there. And we were there from 61 to 66. And in 1966, we located up here in Whitehall. Excuse me. We looked over a lot of different communities and decided White Lake was where we wanted to be. We did have an attachment here, though, of Warren Hutchins, who has Viking Tool. He was married to Marilyn's sister, and that was an influence on coming here. And then I bought out Dr. Bosong's dental practice, and been in Whitehall practicing dentistry until just this past January, or December actually, where I finally hung it up after 46 years, I guess, something like that. And just enjoying retirement now. My wife passed away in December of 2011, but life has still been good here. It's a good area to be.
Well, and I need to disclose that Paul was my neighbor when growing up.
We won't get into those stories.
And my dentist at that time. So, can you describe your earliest memories of White Lake?
Well, Marilyn and I used to come up here to visit Ann and Warren, and it was, as kids, or young marrieds anyway, and and we just enjoyed White Lake area. We watched the formation of Hickory Knoll Golf Club at that time, back in the early 60s, being made. And it just seemed like a nice community to live in. When we first came here, the town couldn't have been more friendly towards us with the reception we got when we came here. The businesses and people were just overwhelming, welcoming us to the area. And we loved it ever since.
At what point did you become aware of White Lake's pollution problems?
Probably just through coffee shop conversations. I became friends with Wenton Dahlstrom and Bob Wesley, and they were campaigners, against it. And I, like everyone else, thought they were nuts for quite a while. And then you began to realize that what they were talking about was pretty serious stuff. And they weren't wrong at all. In fact, they were right on. It just didn't get accepted well.
Being a businessman right in the downtown of Whitehall, did you hear the other viewpoint, or a variety of viewpoints?
Well, what you got was, particularly from the Hooker Company, kind of a clouded disclosures from their employees that they weren't really doing this or they weren't really doing that. But in moving out here to the end of White Lake in 1971 from the city of Whitehall, I can remember many days coming out where driving past Hooker, you could scarcely breathe, and because of whatever they were emitting into the air. I used to ask the I don't plant manager about that, and Hooker always blamed DuPont, and DuPont would blame Hooker. So I never did find out what I was breathing, but I often wondered what it was, but it took your breath away.
What was your understanding of the pollution problem from talking to Wint and Bob, or just hearing it from other people in the community?
That it was serious. It was polluting water supplies and the lake, of course. And the type of pollution in the lake was, not the fertilizer stuff, but things you couldn't see, and contaminating, fish and wildlife, and might be a permanent situation.
Has your understanding of what was going on changed over time?
Well, it probably has, because at first I didn't believe them. So, but I believe it now. So yes, I guess it has.
How do you feel the issue of pollution affected the White Lake area when the news broke and things like that?
Well, I think it's affected us a lot. I'm sure there are people that don't come here because of it. Home prices, I think, are affected, and those on the White Lake. Like I myself, because of my cancer problem, I'm told not to go in because of immunity, not to go into the lake for any reason. But I would have questions even today of swimming in White Lake without that restriction.
Did you do anything during the time of pollution? I mean, did you write any letters, contact government officials, or?
No, I didn't. Probably should have, but I didn't. I would go to meetings once in a while, but I never became actively involved.
What kind of meetings were held?
Well, there were things that, you could go listen to Wint at city councils and things like that. I used to do that once in a while.
Did you think it also might affect your business, or?
Well, at the time, early, that when that was coming out, both Hooker and DuPont had a lot of junior executives, rather nice paying jobs and so forth. And from the economic standpoint, it was nice to have them in the area. And so, economically, and that was something that always entered your mind. Do you want them to leave, or do you want this? And that was a real dilemma. And when they left a lot, a lot of voids in our area, income-wise and leadership-wise. So, did it affect us? Them leaving, did it affect us? Yes, I think it did. But the pollution and so forth, which is worse? I guess in the long run, the pollution is worse.
Did you? Do you know people who worked at any of the companies? And
yes.
And maybe what their feelings were?
Most people that I've talked to that have without naming anyone, were employees of those companies, were very supportive of their companies. And I don't know if that has to do with pensions and things like that or whatever, but I've never found an employee that really, downgraded their company. Did
you know any of them that changed after some of the information came to light?
No, nothing that I knew anyway.
Were you aware of any of the local protests?
Yes.
And what did you think of that?
Well, when they first started, I didn't think much about it, but you know, when the real facts came out, you know, you wondered why you didn't participate yourself sometimes. I know DuPont offered to check all our water supplies and so on, which they did for the house I'm in right now. And they checked it. And I went to Went with the results, Went Dahlstrom with the results. And he says, well, that's all well and good, but that's not the pollution we're talking about for what they checked for. And I kept those statistics for a long, long time. I think I disposed of them about 5 years ago, but that occurred, seems like it was in the 70s that they did that.
What were your feelings about Wint?
I liked him. He would. We had different beliefs in theology, which we talked about sometimes. But we had a friendship, and when we were around the bay here in another house, we had a piano, and he would come over and play the piano, and we had a good time together. If we never really went out to eat together, but if we were in the same restaurant, we would eat together. If we saw each other, we would join together. I liked him.
What do you think of his role in the community?
Well, he stepped out beyond what most people would step out. I mean, I think it cost Went financially to do what he did, but he really believed in what he was doing. You know, he was despised by a lot of people, but if you really listened to what he was saying, I think you had to admire him.
What did you think of the companies that were eventually found responsible for the pollution?
I think DuPont has done a nice job in what they've tried to do in making things right. Occidental, I've always wondered why they didn't step up more, and why every time you wanted to do something, it was a fight over a couple of $1 million to a $1 billion company. It was ridiculous to me that they would fight the way they did to clean things up.
What did you have any concern when you found out the pollution was serious? Did you have any concerns for you or for the community?
Yeah, I don't eat the fish, and I wonder, the home you're in now is in a nice spot, a nice view, and certainly if people are worried about water pollution, it's going to affect the value of this home. So economically, yeah, it affects me, and I'm concerned about that, yeah, even today.
What was your viewpoint of community leaders during the time all this was happening?
Well, initially, the leaders backed the companies, I think, quite strongly. I think some of that's changed, but that didn't change until the companies left.
What was your viewpoint of government, like the agencies that were overseeing the companies?
Well, I think they're too slow to react, usually, and I can't think of the names of the various agencies involved, but everything is always a bunch of rather than do what's right, it was always go through the regulation process rather than get something done to get things cleaned up.
Did you trust the companies?
Well, I did initially. In fact, I would say I was, for what we mentioned before about the economic parts, about the income level of the people that work there and so forth, I was probably pro-company for a long time and didn't believe Went and Bob Wesley of what they were saying and so forth. But that changed.
Would you, what's your feeling about, would you feel differently with a new chemical company coming in?
I wouldn't want to see a new chemical company come in. No, I wouldn't. I know they're a necessary evil for our economy, but White Lake doesn't have to be one of those chemical islands.
Did you, and I think you kind of answered this, but did you have a difficult deciding who to believe about the pollution problems?
Yeah, I did. You always heard of Went was off the wall, and to come around to his view took some time.
Yeah. What helped you change your viewpoint?
Well, the fact that we could sit down at the table and talk, and he could rationally describe something, and just some of the things that appeared through his research and so on that was undeniable what was going on.
Did you understand the pollution problems?
Not initially. You didn't realize that things going into our White Lake here were that harmful. You always thought of pollution as things you could see, not things you couldn't see.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know anything about efforts to clean up White Lake?
Not a great deal, other than the efforts through the tannery and so forth were seemed like to be going in the right direction, and the efforts with Hooker. I don't know anything about what was done with DuPont. I know they closed the pipe into Lake Michigan, which I think was a good thing.
They actually still have a discharge. They're closed, but they treat their contaminated groundwater and it goes out Lake Michigan.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought it was completely closed.
Yeah. They just don't have a discharge from their plant.
The plant.
Activity.
No, I didn't know that. See how little I know?
Well, what changes do you see for the White Lake area in the future?
Well, when you see reports coming in our Beacon and a little bit in the Chronicle about us getting off some of these pollution lists, things must be getting better with the water quality and so forth. So it looks like everything is going upwards in a good direction.
What do you see as the community's greatest needs in relation to environmental protection?
Greatest needs? I'm always a little scary about little watchdog committees and stuff like that, because they can get off on a tangent, but I guess that our township and city governments would work together, that any company coming into our area would have approval from all of those groups, whether they locate in White River or they locate in Whitehall Township, whatever, that the communities could work together to approve these companies and make sure that their discharges are properly disposed of.
Is there anything else you would like to add that I haven't asked you?
No. Would you like some coffee?
Are there any stories you remember? I remember hearing stories of protests and fistfights. And are there any stories?
See, I never got involved in anything like that. I was honestly rather passive to it, and it looked like things like what Went was doing and Bob Wesley was doing. I don't know how much Bob Wesley became a very good friend too. And I have stories about Bob, but we're not going to talk about them.
Are they environmental stories?
Pardon?
Environmental stories?
No, they're just humorous stories of events with him and his life. He was a neat guy, guy that I really miss.
Can you describe him?
Bob was eccentric. He was an absolute fantastic designer. He did work for Whitehall Metal Studios, and I think some other companies also. But he was just interesting. He had a lot of sailing stories and experiences, and we just had good times together.
How important do you think he was in raising some of the concerns?
Well, I think he was important. Not as important as Went, but he was also thought of as pretty strange, and you're into territories that you shouldn't be in. The fear back then was that you're going to force these companies out of here, or these companies aren't going to cooperate with anything, because of the antagonism of Went and Bob, really, and the followers. But they left anyway, for other reasons.
But what do you think really, made the change where pollution was finally being addressed?
I think the local pressure finally did it, and the state must have been involved. That you're talking a long time ago. I don't really remember the whole sequence of events, but it took a lot of pushing to get government to step in and say, Occidental, you have to do this, and DuPont, you have to do this, and things like that.
Well, do you have anything else to add?
Not really, but if you have any more questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Well, thank you very much, Paul.
Well, you're more than welcome.